here. And the late arrival doesn't disturb me at all. I'm just pleased that we could be here together at a time in history when we remember the anniversary of what happened 50 years ago. The Allied forces defeated Nazi tyranny in Europe, and at the same time, the concentration camps were liberated. But I'm here to talk about that and my own liberation, because something happened to me that liberated me in my thinking. Now, it all began for me back in 1943. I had just completed my high school training. I came out into a world that was involved in warfare. My country and yours was involved in World War II. But when I came out of high school, I made a decision. I decided I was going to become part of the United States Army. But it was that decision, my friends, that brought me face to face with what I now know to be institutional racism. You see, on the day that I was inducted into the service, I went down to an induction center with some of my friends who happened to be white. And when we got down to the induction center, there was a sergeant standing at the door. And he took one look at me. And he said, "Go this way." He looked at my friends. And he told them to go this way. Now that was done because, you see, back in 1943, all of the armed forces in the United States were segregated. All of the military. You see, my country practiced and promulgated institutional racism. And in doing that, my country was saying to me, "Leon, you're not good enough. You're not good enough to be in the mainstream of things with everybody else." So they separated me from my friends. I became one of 600 African Americans that were sent down into the deep south of the United States for training. Now, I know many of you are very young, and you may not know what it was like to be down in the deep south in 1943 and to be black. What a painful experience that was for me. But I worked hard as a young soldier on the red clay of Georgia. I wanted to be a good soldier. And so several months later, they came to all of us and they said, "We want you to be combat engineers." So they created the 183rd Engineer Combat Battalion. And for further training, they sent us into Mississippi, then Texas, finally Louisiana and Arkansas. And in all these places, every one of them, the people that live there, the people that I'm going to defend with my life, if necessary, these same people let me know every day in so many different ways that they too thought I wasn't good enough. I'll explain that to you. When I was in Georgia, I had a weekend pass and I went into a place called Macon, Georgia. I walked around that city on this hot summer day, and I became thirsty. And so when I saw this public water fountain, I walked over to it. I leaned over to drink, and someone grabbed me and said, "Hold it, boy, hold it. You don't drink here." Well, man, I was shocked. But that man pointed to the sign. The sign above the water fountain read, "White." He then pointed to another water fountain where the sign above it read, "Colored." You see, he was telling me that I wasn't good enough to drink the water at that fountain. In Texas, where we were practicing our war games, I was with a lieutenant on this particular day. He was driving the Jeep. So at the noon hour, he pulled into Beaumont, Texas. He pulled up in front of a restaurant. He got out of the Jeep and he said to me, "Private Bass, I'm going to meet you back here at this spot in approximately 1 hour." Then he walked away. He walked into the restaurant. But he left me standing on the sidewalk. Well, look, I was hungry too. So when I saw this man coming by, I stopped him. I said, "Mister, tell me, where might I get something to eat?" And that man looked at me and he said, "Boy, You can get something in a restaurant. But you're going to have to go up that alley, go around the back, knock on the door. And when they come, you can tell them the kind of food you want and give them the money, and they'll bring it to you. And then you can find a place over here where you might sit down and eat. Again, I was being told that I wasn't good enough to eat in a restaurant. In Mississippi, I had the good fortune to meet some young ladies from Tougaloo College. And that's a black college about 7 miles north of Jackson in Mississippi. I had met these young ladies, and I was so impressed by them that I wanted to go visit their campus. So on this day, I go into Grenada, Mississippi. I go to the bus depot. I buy my ticket. I come out and I get aboard the bus. But I look up, and I read the signs on the bus, and the sign read, "Colored must be seated at the rear of the bus," the back of the bus. Well, I go to the back of the bus. But when I get back there, I discover that every seat which was available for me to use, well, every one of those seats was already taken. So on this day, my friends, and I kid you not, on this day I stood up for more than 100 miles, looking at empty seats on that bus that I was not permitted to occupy. You see, they had already made up their minds about me. They were letting me know I wasn't good enough to have a seat on their bus. Oh, I'm dressed in the uniform of my country, yes. I've taken an oath. I'm going to protect and defend all of these people, even if it cost me my life. But still, I wasn't good enough. What a damnable experience to have when you're 18 years of age and you volunteer to serve your country. Well, there was very little I could do about that situation except to keep the pain inside. Well, finally the day came for my unit, the 183rd Engineer Combat Battalion, to have overseas duty. So we arrived at Boston in Massachusetts. Then we crossed the Atlantic Ocean to England. We spent 2 months in England. We had to get all of our equipment together. And then finally the day came for us to leave the continent. We leave for the continent. We left by way of Southampton, England. We crossed the English Channel to Le Havre, France. And then we drove our vehicles up through France, and we parked alongside the road outside of a small town. And there we waited. We waited for the orders to come down. Orders that would tell us what our responsibility would be in the war. This was 1944. It was around the Christmas season, and the weather was severe. Temperatures were well below zero. Snow was everywhere. But we waited. And finally our orders came down and said that our unit, the 183rd Engineer Combat Battalion, would be attached to the 3rd Army under the leadership of General George Patton. But it was at this time that something had happened, something of which none of us were aware. You see, the enemy, in one desperate attempt to try to win the war, well, they had been searching and probing. They were looking for some kind of weak spot in our front lines, and they found it. And when they did, they brought in their best, a Panzer Division. They counterattacked. They hit us hard. They pushed our front lines back, back, back. They created what we call a bulge in our front lines. And those of you who are students of history, when you read about World War II, I'm quite certain you're going to read about the Battle of the Bulge. Well, it was into this battle that my unit, the 183rd, had its commitment. We were told that we had to go into this small town in Belgium, a place called Montalange. Now, Montalange was small but very strategic because, see, there was a bridge in this town, a bridge that had been destroyed completely by the enemy, and it became our responsibility to rebuild it. Now, we had to do this because, you see, further up that highway, about another 15 kilometers, there was another small town called Bastogne. And in Bastogne, there were soldiers, American soldiers. They were members of the 101st Airborne Division, and they had been trapped in the town. The enemy had completely encircled them. Their lives were in jeopardy, you see, because they could be wiped out. So rescue was the only thing left. General Patton and a host of others were getting together. The resources, the tanks, the guns, the men, all of that they would need. They were going up there on a rescue mission. But in order to get up there, many of them would have to cross that bridge in Montalange. So you see, we had our work cut out for us. We had to rebuild that bridge. And so we began to work. We worked night and day. In spite of the weather, we worked. In spite of the shelling of those 88 howitzers by the enemy. In spite of the 1 or 2 airplanes that came over and would strafe us with machine gun bullets or try to bomb the bridge. In spite of the landmines that were all around us, we worked on the bridge. And we finished that bridge. We finished it on time. And all of those resources, the men, the tanks, the guns, whatever, they crossed. They went up to Bastogne. And they rescued all of those men. My God, that was a glorious day. Indeed it was. What a wonderful experience. But you know and I know that in a war, you pay a price for glory. And I found that out one day. One day I was standing in the snow, and I watched the grave registration trucks go by with the bodies of American soldiers piled high atop one another. And as I stood there, I looked at that, and I said to myself, Leon, why did you join the Army? What are you doing in this place? You could end up that way. What are you doing here? I said, what are you fighting for? Hey, I remembered something. I remembered that I couldn't get a drink of water at a fountain back home. I couldn't get a meal in a restaurant back home. They wouldn't let me have a seat on a bus back home. So I said to myself, what are you doing here? What in the heck are you fighting for? Oh, I couldn't have the answers. I was only 19 years of age. So I didn't know all of the answers. But I can tell you this. I was one angry young black soldier. Oh, yes, I was angry at my country. I felt my country was abusing me, using me, putting me out there to fight and maybe die for all those things that Americans enjoy, all those rights and privileges. But at the same time, my country was saying to me, Leon, you're not good enough to enjoy what you're fighting for. So, yes, I was angry. Oh, I was angry. But the war went on, and my unit had to go with it. So we went through the rest of France and then Belgium, Luxembourg. We went into Germany. We crossed the Rhine River at Mainz. And then I saw places I used to read about, Frankfurt, Cologne, Dusseldorf, one place called Bad Kreuznach. There was Eisenach. And finally, Nuremberg. The months had gone by. It was now 1945. We were winning the war. Well, it was at that juncture that we received our orders to go down into East Germany in a hurry to a place called Weimar. We went down there. We joined up with the other American forces. But immediately, as soon as our camp was established, the lieutenant who was in the intelligence reconnaissance section, I was in that same section. That lieutenant came over to me and 2 others, and he said, come with me. We followed him. We got aboard a truck. But I leaned over, and I said to him, sir, tell me, where are we going? And he responded by saying, we're going to a concentration camp. Well, now, my friends, I was a little bit perplexed and puzzled because I didn't know anything about a concentration camp. In all my training, no one had ever mentioned concentration camps. Yet on this day, in April, in 1945, I was to have the shock of my life because I was going to walk through the gates of a concentration camp called Buchenwald. And believe me, I wasn't ready for that. I was totally unprepared for that experience. But I can never, ever forget that day, that spring day in April when I walked through those gates. And I saw in front of me what I now refer to as the walking dead. I saw human beings that had been beaten, that had been starved, that had been tortured. They'd been denied all the basic things that make life livable. There they stood in front of me. They were skin and bone. They had those skeletal faces with deep-set eyes. Their heads had been clean shaved, and they were standing there holding on to one another just to keep from falling. I had never seen anything like this in my life. I couldn't understand any of it, but they began to move. They started moving. They were stumbling and holding on to one another, and they started saying things. They were speaking in many different languages, none of which I could understand. So I backed away. I backed up, but then I stopped, and I said to myself, my God, what is all this insanity? Who are these people? What sort of crime have they committed that would cause anybody to treat them this way? You see, I didn't know, honestly. I didn't know. But there was a young man there. He was Polish, but he spoke English quite well. So he began to tell us about Buchenwald. He said that these people were Jews. They were gypsies. They were Jehovah's Witnesses. Some were Catholics. They were trade unionists, communists, homosexuals. He went on, listing all the different groups that had been placed in the camp. And I submit to you this morning that the Nazis placed them all there because the Nazis said none of them were good enough. Therefore, they were not fit to live. They could be terminated, murdered. Wow. I couldn't get a handle on this. This was all beyond anything that I had ever experienced. So I walked away. I walked about the camp. I wanted to see more. I went to a place where the men would sleep. They called it a barrack. I opened the door. I stepped across the threshold. I closed the door, but I could go no further. You see, the odor, the stench that comes from death and human waste was just overpowering. It was awesome. I stood there. I was holding my breath all the time. I couldn't stay. I knew I had to leave. And so I turned. But before I could step away, I looked down. And there, on a bottom bunk near the door, was a man, an emaciated, skin and bone human being. He was on a bed of filthy straw and rags, and he was trying so desperately to look at me with that skeletal face and those deep-set eyes, but he was so weak. You see, he had been starved for so long. It became a struggle for him to look at me. But finally he did. He looked up at me. He said nothing. Nor did I. So I opened the door. I stepped across the threshold and I closed the door. I was ready to leave, but another man, another skin and bone human being, stopped in front of me. He undid what was holding his trousers, his pants. He let them fall. He squatted down in front of me and began to defecate right there. I looked at that and I said to myself, oh, no, you don't do that in public. Where is your dignity? But you see, that was my hang-up. I was hung up on something called dignity. That man was merely trying to survive. He wanted to live. I didn't know. The young man told me that in a building nearby, I would find all parts of the human body in jars of formaldehyde. Well, then it dawned on me that the Nazis did medical experiments on human beings at Buchenwald. And that when they finished their operation, whatever part of the body they wanted to keep, they would take it, put it in the jar, and put on a label. Well, I couldn't read the German, but I could see, and I saw it all. Eyes, ears, fingers, hearts, livers, kidneys, genitalia, all of it was there. On a table nearby was human skin. Human. Someone had done artwork on human skin. There was a lampshade in the room that was made out of human skin. That's enough to boggle your mind. But I saw it. I went into another building. This one was the place where they tortured people, where they attempted to get information. I couldn't believe this. I couldn't buy that anybody would torture anybody in 1945, not in a civilized society. I thought torture was something that happened in the Middle Ages. But then I walked inside the building. I saw the blackened blood on the cement floor. I saw the blood on the slab where they would put their victims and the restraints that would hold the victim there. And on the wall, some of the instruments that had been used in the torture, well, they were still hanging on the wall. So now I believed. I've been in the camp, maybe 4 hours. And in that time, I didn't see any children. So I asked the young man about that. I said, tell me, where are the children? And he assured me that children were in that camp. But I didn't see them. Yet on this day, as I was leaving this building, I saw the clothing of little children that didn't survive. I saw mounds of clothing up against the wall. There were caps, sweaters, stockings, shoes. For babies, there were little booties. I saw all of these things and more that belonged to little children. But I never saw a child. Finally, I walked past those that were dead and the others that were dying toward another building. As I got close, I could see the dead bodies. They were stacked about 4 feet high. They stretched almost as wide as this center section in this auditorium. They were up against this building called the crematorium. I went inside the building, and I saw that there were 6 ovens. 6. I walked over. I looked into one, and I saw what was left of someone who had been placed there. I saw the man's blackened skull. I saw his rib cage, the bones, the ashes. The young man said to me, on a given day, the Nazis would come with a truck. They would remove the ashes from all of the ovens throughout the entire camp. These ashes would be transported to a farm which they operated, and then they would spread the ashes all over the farmland as human fertilizer. You see, that in time would enrich the soil. And they could grow the things that would help to feed their army, the Wehrmacht. Well, by this time, I'd seen more than I want to talk about this morning with you. My stomach was queasy. I was going to be sick. I needed some fresh air. I had to get out of there, so I left. I walked away from my friends. I went back to the gate where we had come in. And I stood there waiting for them to come. But as I waited, I realized that, hey, I wasn't the same anymore. Something had happened to me. You see, I came in that camp as that angry young soldier, angry at my country because of what my country was doing to me. But now I could see a bit more clearly. My blinders came off. My tunnel vision dissipated. I now understood that human suffering is not relegated to just me and mine. Human suffering can touch all of us, every one of us. But more than that, I knew that on this day I had seen the face of evil. I'm speaking about racism, anti-Semitism, the bigotry, the prejudice, all of that hate. I saw it right there, carried to the ultimate at Buchenwald. And somehow I knew we had to eradicate it. We had to get rid of it. But, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was only 20 years of age. But I had a feeling, deep down inside, I had a feeling that someday, someplace, somehow, I would have to deal with that evil. Well, my friends came. We got back aboard the truck. We left that place in silence. No one said a word about what they saw that day at Buchenwald. Shortly after that time, the war in Europe ended. My unit was no longer needed, so they broke us up. They disbanded our unit. I was sent down to the Philippines with another unit for about 8 months. I was stationed outside of Manila. But when the war ended in the Pacific, I came home. I came back to Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, and that's a good feeling. I'd been away for 3 years. It was good to be home. But I had to put my life together, so I decided I would go to college. You have to understand, there was something in the United States called the GI Bill of Rights. You might have heard of it. It's where Uncle Sam, the government, would pay your way to college. It was like an affirmative action long before it was popular. But I decided I'd go to college. I went out to a place in Pennsylvania called Westchester. There was a teacher's college there. I wanted to be a teacher. So I go down to the college. But I was kind of shaky about that because you have to send your transcript to college, the grades and marks you made when you were in high school. Boy, I was shaky about that because when I was in high school, I sort of tiptoed through the tulips. I didn't do too much. I didn't think they would take me. But they did. I became a student at Westchester State Teachers College. And what a happy young man I was because I was the first one in my family to go to college. But all of a sudden, that happiness disappeared. Oh, yes. You see, the face of evil was in Westchester. It was in the town. That evil was on the college campus. You see, once I registered, I waited around. I wanted to find out what dormitory I was going to live in. Who might be my roommate? But no. I wasn't going to live in their dormitories. I wasn't going to have a roommate. You see, they had already made up their minds that I wasn't good enough to live in their dormitory or have a roommate. Can you believe that? Can you believe that here it is, 1946? I spent 3 years of my life in the military. I risked everything. I laid my life on the line to make those people at that college safe and secure. But the only thing they could say to me in 1946 was, Leon, you are still not good enough. Oh, my friends, for me to stand up here this morning and say to you that I was angry, that would be an understatement. Man, I was furious. I was enraged. I wanted to hurt somebody. Hey, you have to understand something about me. Back in 1946, I was not a nonviolent person. You mess with me, I'll put a hurting on you. I really would. But I was fortunate. I had wonderful parents who understood about life. I didn't think they knew very much when I was 18. But boy, after I got out of that army in 3 years, my parents were brilliant. They knew everything. My dad sat me down and he said, son, I don't want you going out to that Westchester, running your big mouth, thinking you're going to change the world. He said, no, I want you to go out there with one purpose in mind, and that's to get your education. Because, son, once you get it, nobody can take it away from you. Well, I listened to my dad. I swallowed my pride. I kept my pain inside. I went to that institution, and I got my education. But one day I did something. I walked up High Street. That's the main street in Westchester, to the movie theater, the Warner Theater. I bought my ticket. I gave it to the usher on the inside, and immediately he pointed to some steps that led up to a balcony. You see, he was telling me that I wasn't good enough to sit down on the main floor. Oh, he should never have done that. Oh, no. I walked right past that young man, I walked into that theater. I sat down in the middle, right on the main floor. That was my protest, you see. I was telling him and everybody else, look, I'm good enough. Well, you do things when you're angry and upset. But when you sit still a while, like I did, and you begin to think about what you've done, that's when you get nervous and you start shaking. And I'm sitting in this movie theater and I'm shaking, and I say to myself, Leon, you're not going to graduate from college, you're going to jail. Oh, yes, they would call the police in a minute. But nobody came. Nobody. The movie ended. My friends, I'd love to be able to tell you the name of that movie, but I can't remember a thing about that movie. People got up to leave the theater. So did I. But as I walked out, I looked to my right, I looked to my left. I thought the man would be there to put the arm on me, but no one did. I had a room in town where I was living, and I walked back to my room. And with every step I took, I got taller and taller. I must have been 10 or 15 feet tall when I got back to my... You know why I felt that way? I felt that way because on this day I had come face to face with evil, and I didn't become evil. And believe me, that was a tough ball game for me to participate in. I did it. Oh, I felt so good about it. But it was 1949, and I was graduated from Westchester. I'm a teacher. I had gone to summer school 3 times, so I got out in 3 years. I was in a hurry. I had a teaching position in Philadelphia. I'm teaching in an all-black elementary school. Separate but equal, you know, had its impact on Philadelphia, too. I'm teaching a 5th grade class of 49 youngsters. Oh, they were wall-to-wall kids. They came to school every day. And I'm teaching spelling, reading, arithmetic, social studies, science, all the basic courses they need. Stand and deliver, that's me. But the one thing they needed, I couldn't deliver. Oh, I could see it in their eyes. Those young people needed hope. They needed hope that tomorrow would be better than today. I couldn't promise it. I couldn't. There wasn't much hope around in the early 50s. But one day, in a place called Montgomery, Alabama, there was a lady. You know her. Her name, Rosa Parks. God bless her. She's living today. Rosa Parks was a black woman, a seamstress, who left her job and came to the bus stop. And when the bus came, she got aboard. But she did something that was unprecedented. She took a seat in the front section of the bus. Oh, that was a no-no. But Rosa was courageous. Rosa was tired. When the bus driver saw her, he came over and he said, "Move. Give that man your seat." Rosa looked at him, she smiled and said, "No." Ooh, he became livid with rage. "You move, I'll have you arrested." And Rosa said, "No." And he called the police. Yes, he did. They came. They arrested that God-fearing woman. They took her off to jail and booked her. But when the news of that arrest spread across Montgomery, oh, like wildfire, when the black community heard it, they were so angry, so incensed, they came in large numbers to the church and they talked about the evil that had been perpetrated against Sister Rosa. What are we going to do? What are we going to do, they said. And after a long discussion, they came to this conclusion. They said, if we can't ride those buses with some degree of dignity, then we're going to walk. And so, my friends, that was the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott. That was the beginning of the civil rights movement in the United States of America. And those people walked. For 13 long months, they walked. No one rode the buses. The bus company was going bankrupt. Merchants in town were crying because business was so bad. But finally, the Supreme Court of the United States made a decision and said, what was happening on the buses in Montgomery was wrong. It was unconstitutional. Well, that meant the people had won. It was their first victory. They went back to their churches clapping, singing. Oh, man, they were anxious to do one thing the next day. They wanted to come out and get on somebody's bus. But the words of their leader, Dr. Martin Luther King, reminded them of their responsibility when he said, don't go back with hate in your hearts. Go back with love. Take your rightful place on the buses. with dignity. And then he said something which I can never forget. And I was up in Philadelphia when I heard it. He said to all of those people assembled, he said, "We will wear them down with our capacity for love." Well, when I heard that, I said, that man is crazy. He's got to be crazy. You know what he's asking me to do? He wants me to love people, people who spit on me, who beat me, who mistreat my children, who bomb my churches. That man's out of his mind. If he's asking me to love them, hey, but those people listened, they believed, they followed, and they had all those victories. So I was finally convinced. And I said to myself, Leon, hope is still alive. Things can change. And one day, you might never believe this, but one day that giant of a man came up to Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. He came 2 blocks from the school where I was teaching near Temple University. And I took all of my young people around to that playground. We wanted to see and hear this giant of a man. And he walked out on that playground, and I looked at him. He was a little guy. Oh, my. But he opened his mouth, and he began to speak, and I recognized him for the giant that he was. He said things I needed to hear, things my children needed to hear. He spoke of loving, of nurturing. He spoke of compassion and understanding. He spoke of responsibility and of being a good community. And then he spoke to all of those poor youngsters. He spoke to them about excellence. He said to them, if you can't be the pine on the top of the hill, then be that little shrub in the valley below. But you be the best, no matter where you are. And then he admonished them. He said to them, all of you here will not become doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers, and chemists. No. It may fall to some of you to sweep the streets. So be it. But if you sweep the streets, he said, I want you to sweep the streets like Beethoven wrote that music. You sweep the streets like Michelangelo painted those pictures. You sweep the streets like Shakespeare wrote his poetry. In other words, you be the best, no matter what it is that you do. Man, I was mesmerized. No one had ever touched me with words that way before. I went back to my school. I was walking on air. I said to myself, Leon, you've got to do more. And I did. You know, it was 1963. I found myself down in Washington, D.C. with 250,000 people. We had marched on Washington. We went down there to tell the world and the Congress that we were good enough. And it was time for things to change. And we waited out in front of the Lincoln Memorial for this giant of a man to come out and speak to us. And I remember that summer day when he came out to the microphones, when he raised his voice and he said, I have a dream that one day people will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream, he said. Oh, my friends, I cried. Oh, I cried. But everybody was crying. Rich people, poor people, white people, black people, Jews, Gentiles, Catholics, Protestants, a smorgasbord of people. They were all crying unashamedly. This was a beautiful, beautiful day. I came back to Philadelphia. I worked hard as a teacher. I took the examination, and I finally passed and became an elementary school principal. But then tragedy struck. Dr. King was assassinated, and my world began to crumble. I thought we had lost the dream because we had lost our dreamer. And it took me months to pull myself together, but I finally did. One day I got a telephone call from the superintendent of schools. He said, Leon, come down to my office. I want to speak with you. So I go down there, and he said to me, I have a high school that needs a principal, and I thought about you. Would you be willing to accept the leadership in that role as principal? Well, right away I got suspicious. And I said, if he offers me a high school, I bet it's bankrupt. So I asked him, I said, sir, what's the name of that school? He said, it's the Benjamin Franklin High School. Well, he didn't have to say another word. He was talking about the toughest school in the city of Philadelphia. Oh, yes, these were all young men. There were no girls in the school. These were some bad dudes, man, bad. They were gangs in the school. They were bad when I went to school. I remember we played football against these young men, and I knew that at halftime this is what they would do. They would all run out on the field. They'd turn around and face us, and they'd start cheering, and they would say, "If you win this game, we'll win the fight." Oh, boy. So, I never waited for that game to end. I always left early. But now I'm the principal. So what am I going to do? Well, I put on my best suit, tie. I had an attaché case. It was filled with love. I'm going to change the world, right? Wrong. I was a half block from the school, and I heard the noise. And I looked, and there on the patio, on the sidewalk, out in Broad Street, blocking traffic, were some of these angry young men. I stopped. I said to myself, why aren't they in class? You see, I didn't know. I didn't know that about a day or two before I arrived, there had been a big demonstration down at the Board of Education. 2,000 of my young men went down there. They were joined by others. They were protesting. They wanted the quality of education to be better. They were tired of this, they call it this Mickey Mouse stuff. They wanted something better. Well, while they were down there, things got ugly. Someone called the police. And when the police came, people were beaten and arrested. So here I come, and they're angry. But I had to get to the office, so I started through that crowd. And I was doing okay. I almost got to the door, but before I could reach there, this big fella stood up in front of me. I looked at him. Oh, boy. I said, yes. He said, mister, you the new dude that made principal here? Oh, boy. I said in my standard English, young man, that's what they tell me. And he said, fellas, he's here. He's here. You see, I didn't know. I didn't know they had been asking to have an African American as their principal. They never had one since the inception of the school, more than 50 years. And I was chosen. And they crowded around me. And I said to myself, Leon, you're in trouble now. And they gathered around me and they started asking me, all right, mister, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to make the school better? What's your program? I said, hold it, back off. Give me a minute now. Remember, I just got here. And with that, one young man said, mister, if you don't do something now, well, we're going to burn this place down. Ooh, he was serious. They were all serious, I walked around that school for months. I had a dull headache. I was trying to understand how I could bring some order out of chaos, how I could make education the most important thing for them. And one day, on my tour of duty, I came to a classroom, and I heard the noise. I stopped, I looked, and there in the classroom I saw some of these angry young men, feet up on the furniture, had their hats on, smoking cigarettes. I even heard some profanity. So I said, oh, no. I went into that classroom, and I saw this lady. She was not the teacher. She was a visitor. She was a survivor. She had survived one of the worst concentration camps in Europe. She came out of a place called Auschwitz. And on this day, she had come to the school to talk to the young men, to share her pain. But the young men didn't want to hear about her pain. They had their own. I couldn't take that rudeness any longer. I stepped into the classroom. I said, all right, fellas, hold it, cool it. Listen, what this lady's trying to tell you, well, all of that really happened. I know it did because I was there. I saw it. They got quiet. She shared her pain. She told them how she had lost her grandmother, her grandfather, her mother, her father. There were 3 brothers and a sister. All of them had come into Auschwitz. They went first to the gas chambers. They ended up in those despicable ovens, so that when it was all over, only she, her name is Nina Kaleska, and she still lives somewhere around Philadelphia today. Only Nina came out of that place alive. Those young men listened to her. I know they did by the kinds of questions they asked. They came forward and looked at the numbers that were tattooed on her arm by the Nazis for identification purposes. They shook her hand. And then they did something that was totally out of character. For them, they walked out of the classroom in silence. And she turned to me with tears in her eyes, and she talked to me for more than an hour. And in that time, she convinced me that I had something to say, that I should be telling people about what I saw at the Buchenwald concentration camp. And so, my friends, I've been saying that ever since. I've been speaking all across the United States, into Canada, into maximum security prisons. I go to colleges, universities. I come here today to talk to you, to tell you that the evil, yes, the evil is still with us. I'm speaking about racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, ageism, the bigotry, the prejudice, all of that hate. It's still with us. It's out there. It's in here. Oh, yes. That evil is in here. It sits on our shoulders, yours and mine. Every waking hour, that evil is sort of whispering in our ear, trying to take over our hearts and our minds. It wants to convince all of us that we should hate people who are different than we are. Oh, yes, we should hate them because they're poor. We should hate them because they're homeless. They're not good enough because they have AIDS. They're not worthy because they're homosexuals. Oh, yes, we should hate them because they happen to be black, white, Asian, Hispanic. They happen to be Jewish, Catholic, Muslim, Jehovah's Witness, whatever. We should hate them because they're handicapped. They're not good enough because they happen to be women. Oh, yes, that evil, if we permit it, will try to take over our hearts and our minds. But we've got to fight it. And you say to me, well, Leon, that's not easily done. Well, look, I didn't come here to plant a rose garden. I came here to tell you the truth. If you dare to be a Daniel, if you dare to walk into the lion's den, if you dare to confront the evil and stand up against it, then you better be ready, because that can be painful. Oh, they'll talk about you in a minute. They'll call you names. Yes, nigger lover, Jew lover, spick lover, Mick lover, Polak lover, all kinds of denigrating terms. They want you to back away from what you've learned from your places of worship. But we have to be strong. We have to be able to answer this question. Is the price too high? Think about it. Is the price too high to stand up for what you believe? I don't think it is. But you see, I can only speak for me. You must answer that question. Is the price too high? Well, you say to me, Leon, give me some ammunition. I got to fight evil. I give you two things. One, education. And I know you're getting that here. Make sure you do your term papers. Get them in on time. I know it's hard. Do that reading. Make sure you participate in the classroom. But you know, the education I'm talking about, as important as all the rest of it is, I think the important part of it is getting to know somebody in your school who's totally different than you are. They're different because of their color, their religion, because they're handicapped. They're different because they have a different gender. They're different because they live on a different amount of money than you do. Get to know all these people, man. That's what'll help you when the chips are down. And the other piece of the action is love. Not the love in the movies, no. And not the love in those soap operas that some of you love to watch. And I certainly don't mean the love in those magazines that you see in the supermarkets, no. The kind of love I'm talking about is the love that brought all of you here today, looking so beautiful. Somebody at home went to work so that you might continue to look that way. They're trying to get the money together for your tuition, whatever it might be. That's love. Love is when you got here and the teacher said to you, you didn't turn in your term paper, and you didn't do too well on that last test. And if you don't get cracking, I'm going to fail you. That's love. I know it's hard to believe, but that's love. Love is when you can say to your best friend who makes a bigoted, racial, or anti-Semitic remark about someone, you can say to them, hey, you're my main person, but I love you madly, but you're wrong. That's love. Love is what gets me up in the morning at 5 o'clock, some ungodly hour. You know, I'm retired. I'm not supposed to get up that early. But I get up to catch an airplane, to come all the way out here to talk to you, and I don't even know you. That's love, man. And so I'm going to close because you've been sitting here for a long time listening to me, and that's got to be love. So let me close with the words of a great writer, James Baldwin, who died about 13 or 14 years ago. And it was he who said, and I quote, "Either we love one another, either we hold to one another, or that sea will engulf us and the light will go out." We, you and I, we have an awesome responsibility because we must keep the light shining. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
We are fortunate to have some time for questions or comments from the floor before I call upon David Johnson to give a formal thank you. Is there anyone who would like to approach one of the two mics to engage Dr. Bass one-on-one?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Leon, last night you mentioned your own liberation. I didn't
hear
it this time, and I'd like you to just maybe say a couple of lines on that. I thought it was so appropriate.
Yes, liberation came from me, not because I had my hands shackled, or that there were those who were trying to imprison me as they did those in the concentration camps. My liberation came because my mind and my heart was set free. You see, when I came in, I had some bad feelings about people who were white. I thought they were my enemy. But then when I came into the camp, I realized that wasn't so. The enemy was the evil of racism, anti-Semitism, the bigotry, the prejudice, all of that damages all of us. That's what I discovered. And I could not zero my feelings towards any particular group. I had to somehow face up to the responsibility that was mine. I was set free because I no longer zeroed in on hating people. I had to hate that which created the monster. And you see, I was part of that monster. And I had to somehow free myself from that. And I did. But I didn't know what I was going to do to try to get rid of the monster. It was out there affecting so many people. I came back home trying to somehow find a way. And I was fortunate to have lived during the time of a man like Dr. Martin Luther King. I was fortunate to have parents who loved me so much that I somehow had my life touched to the point where I began to see that your pain is my pain, and my pain must be your pain. And when you come to that realization, man, you're liberated. You're free. And nobody can ever incarcerate you again. Because this is what's important up here and in here. I hope I answered your question. Okay. Anybody else with a question? Yes. Please don't hesitate. I don't mind. I'll try to answer any questions that you ask. Yes.
Dr. Bass, first of all, I'd like to thank you again for your wonderful speech today.
Thank you.
You've given me two wonderful gifts. Your speech today really opened my heart and my mind to a lot of things I hadn't known. And your first gift was when you went in to liberate the prisoners of Buchenwald. My father is here today, and he's one of the prisoners you liberated.
Oh.
Right.
Sir.
Dad, do you want to stand up? As a child of a survivor myself, actually a child of two survivors, my mother is also freed, there's a weight that I carry in my heart and in my mind that you and people like yourself have helped to liberate. And I also have some questions as to how we can help to continue this awareness, get people to understand, dealing with the fears. And there's one thing specifically I'd like to ask you. There's a group called the Human Life International, HLI, that is currently holding a gathering here in Montreal, and they are definitely speaking words of hatred towards Muslims, Jews, a number of homosexuals, people with AIDS, etc. What can we do non-violently to quell our violence, to quell our hatred, to quell our fears, and to go out there and do something to stop this?
Ooh, okay. Well, first of all, I must thank you very much. And, sir, I'll talk to you a little later. I talk to young people, and they ask me that question, and I tried to make them understand that they can't solve all the world's problems. Those adversaries are formidable. You can't solve what's happening in, say, South Africa, or in Ireland, or in Pakistan, or in the Middle East. And you must be concerned about those things in Rwanda and Somalia, but that's so far away, and sometimes it can be a cop-out, saying, I can't do this. So I say to them, don't take a big bite of the problem, you get indigestion. Take a little bite. And that little bite might mean dealing with someone in your classroom who sits right next to you, who somehow has a point of view about women and their place in things, and you have a chance to say to him or her, you're wrong. You're wrong. That's where you can begin. You can begin out on the playground. When somebody is being excluded instead of included, you can stand up and champion the person's right to be a part of things. That's one way to do it. You can do it around the dinner table with the people you love most who disagree with you sometime, because you come here and you learn all about loving and caring, and you go home and, hey, around the dinner table things can get hot and heavy. Or do you have the courage to say to your parents and those you love, I love you, but you're wrong? That's hot. Oh, yes, you can be grounded, I know, and all of that. But you have to do it with love. And that's one of the most difficult things. When you feel you are oppressed, the most difficult thing is not to take on the tactics of the oppressor. You've got to rise up above that. If you want to change people, if you want to effectuate a change in other people's lives, you have to give them something to shoot for. If you go down into the gutter where they happen to be at the time, then you have joined them. No one gains. You've got to be better than that. Oh, I know I'm asking a lot of you, but that's what it's all about. And, gee, there's so many things I wanted to say, and I'm getting old, and Alzheimer's grabs me, and I keep forgetting some of the things I want to say. But it's so important that you understand that love is the answer, and getting an education, because if you're not educated, you can be a victim, or worse yet, you can make somebody else a victim. So education and love are needed, sorely. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
I would also like to mention to people that tonight at 7:30 there will be a demonstration around Place d'Armes Metro Station against HLI, and I would invite all of you to come. This is another way to show that we are against racism and anti-Semitism and to stand up for what we believe.
Thank you. Yes, sir?
In Waco High School, we have quite a big population of black people, and sometimes I do feel the prejudice against white people from black. I do understand why. I mean, I have many black friends, and they tell me the racist stories that they experience, but I don't understand why innocent people like me have to sort of pay for other people's mistakes.
Yeah. I agree with you that the sins of the father shouldn't be dumped on the children. And whatever someone had done to me in the past because I was black, I shouldn't turn around and try to dump on you and blame you for that. The only time I can blame you is if you're not doing anything to make things better today. You understand? If you're not doing anything, then I'm saying you're part of the problem instead of a part of the solution. So that's where I look. If you're going to make an assessment of who and what is doing the right thing, then you have to base it on those things. Not because my father was German or my grandfather was a Nazi. No, I can't do that. I have to look at you as a human being and say, how do you stand? What is your role? Are you with those people that, H-I-L-I-V? H-L-I? Yeah, they should have H-L-I-V too. H-L-I? Are you with them? Or are you going to be the person who's going to go down and stand tall in a nonviolent way and say, you're wrong? If you do that, you're part of the solution. If you go home and do nothing, you're part of the problem. You can't say, I'm going to stay home, I'm not going to bother anybody. No such thing as a bystander. If you keep quiet, you're just as guilty as the person who's making those statements. You see, I'm not going to let you off the hook. We all have a responsibility to each other. Don't tell me I belong to this race or that race. No, you belong to the human race. And as such, you have a responsibility to everybody here. Rich, poor, white, black, doesn't matter. You have a responsibility. Your pain is my pain, you see. And that's important. And if you can't identify that way, then you're not a part of the human family yet. Not really. I tried. I don't know whether I hit it or not. You understand about some young blacks, and I'm going to deal with what you're talking about. People react to racism. The racism damages all of us. It gives some people a false sense of superiority. For other people, they get a false sense of who they are, and they don't have enough self-esteem, and they think that they're not good enough. This is what racism does. And then sometimes when people begin to see the light, they get angry. And then they turn, and they react to racism, and they treat you the way they've been treated. Or maybe worse. That's what happens. Racism is an evil. Anti-Semitism, the bigotry, all of that stuff will reduce us and make us less than we ought to be if we don't fight it. Every day is a struggle. I know you go to your church on Sunday. You know, we go through the ritual, don't we? We get our beads out and we count them. We get out on our knees. We pray. We look at the Talmud and we do all of these things that are important. But that's a ritual. All that is used is just to focus us on the way we should behave when Monday comes. You see? And so many people get caught up in the ritual, they forget all about what the ritual should be causing us to do. I remember saluting the flag when I was in the United States, and we would pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And the last few lines would say, with liberty and justice for all. And at the same time I was saying that, I knew there was not liberty and justice for all. I knew it. What a farce that was. What a joke that was. It was a ritual. Didn't mean a thing. Not to me. But yet I played the game. So now I refuse to do that. I will make my pledge, yes. But it has more meaning for me than it did at that time. So don't let your ritual become the end all. The ritual is just a means to get you to focus on what you should be doing to and with each other as you live. Anybody else with a question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just curious to know. I was just wondering, what was the outcome of the high school?
What was the outcome of the high school? Hey, that's a goodie. Well, I tell you, I gave it my best shot. I couldn't say that I solved all the problems. No. I did do one thing. I brought young ladies into the school, young women. Best thing that ever happened to the school. Yeah. I brought young women in. Okay. And we got rid of the gangs. When I say we, I mean parents, students, and teachers. We all worked together and got rid of the gangs. I got some programs going which were academically oriented to recognize those who had the potential to polish up these diamonds in the rough and get them ready for college. We did quite a few things in that regard. And did I win all? No. It's like sand through the fingers sometimes. And I regret that because human waste is the worst kind of waste. Human waste. And I saw so many intelligent with young men with great potential. I saw them go down the tube because the sins of omission and commission on the part of so many of us didn't give them what they needed to survive. Anyone with a question? Oh, this young lady? All right. Anytime you think I'm overdoing it, you give me a cut. Last question. Okay.
You said that, like, you know, turning the other cheek is better, but, like, okay, I'm a young lady and I'm black, right?
Yes.
I think, like, I have it harder than the next white man would or the next white woman would.
Okay.
But if I don't react on what somebody would say to me, how am I like getting closer to solving the problem?
Okay. That's a good question, And I think you must react. The only thing I'm saying is, how do you react? If somebody comes up and mistreats you, do you call them a bunch of mothers and a whole lot of other terms that are negative? Or do you try to find a way to say, hey, look, man, you my main person, but you hurt me when you did that. You hurt me, and I never expected that of you. There are ways to respond, and you don't have to be ugly to get your point across. If you don't say anything, you're wrong. You must react to evil, but you have to do it in a way that will not identify you as being evil. I thought you said this was the last question. One gentleman? Okay. I hope I tried to answer your question. If not, I'll talk to you later and try to amplify it a little more. I'll try.
Yes, Dr. Bass, I have no question, but as a Holocaust survivor and having lost most of my family in concentration camps, including my father in Buchenwald, I'd like to say a big thank you, and please keep up the good work.
I will try.
David Johnson, the Academic Dean of Vanier College, will now thank the speaker on our behalf.
Boy, all I can say is once a teacher, always a teacher. You can't get away from it, can you? Dr. Bass, I would like to thank you on behalf of Vanier College and all the students here and the people who are visiting the college to take part in this seminar for a very personalized account of some of the major events of the latter half of this century. I think the events that you have related to us and your participation in them has given them a reality that otherwise would not have occurred to us. You can read about Buchenwald, you can read about the Battle of the Bulge, you can read about the civil rights movement in the States, but until you actually hear somebody like you present it firsthand, we really cannot appreciate the changes that have come about because of the actions of individuals. I think what I find truly amazing is that you were able to come out of some fairly horrendous situations with such an amazingly positive attitude and philosophy towards life, and to take that and translate it into action. I think everyone here and everyone whose life has been touched by you has to thank you for that. I think we have to thank you also for challenging us to demonstrate in our own lives on a daily basis the love that you speak of. Without us being able to do that individually, one-on-one, we will never be able to do it on a larger scale between groups and between races and between religions. So I thank you for this challenge, and I would ask everybody to join me in thanking you in the usual way.